Mike Jeffries is a former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch during the brand's heyday in the 90s and the early 2000s, is facing allegations of exploitation by men who were recruited for sex events he was hosting around the world, often in exchange for promises of being able to be a model for Abercrombie and Fitch. Now, two former US prosecutors reviewed documents and they have firsthand accounts gathered by the BBC for its report. They're calling for prosecutors to investigate whether Jeffries should face sex trafficking charges. So this is very, very serious allegations we're talking about. And speaking of these allegations, let's discuss how they gathered their information. The BBC reported that as part of a 2-year investigation, the BBC has spoken to 12 men who described attending or organizing events involving sex acts run by Mr. Jeffries, who's now 79, and his British partner, Mr. Smith, who is 60, between 2009 and 2015. The 8 men who attended the event said they were recruited by a middleman who they described as having a missing nose covered with a snakeskin patch. The BBC has identified him as James Jacobson. Now, half the men who told the BBC about their recruitment alleged they had been initially misled about the nature of the events and not told sex was involved. Others said they understood the events would be sexual, but not exactly what was expected of them. All of them were paid. Several told the BBC the middleman or other recruiters raised the possibility of modeling opportunities with A&F. All except one said they felt harmed by the experience. And with that set up, let's talk about the specific allegations. And I want to say to anyone who is sensitive to these topics, this is a warning that we're going to discuss sexual impropriety. We're going to discuss what is alleged sexual assault. So you might want to tune out for the next few minutes. David Bradberry, then 23, said he was introduced in 2010 to Mr. Jacobson by an agent who described him as the gatekeeper to, quote, the owners of A&F, but said there was no mention of sex. At their meeting, he asked Mr. Jacobson, suggested Bruce Weber, then A&F's official photographer, should take his picture. Then Mr. Bradberry said, Jim made it clear to me that unless I let him perform oral sex on me, that I would not be meeting with Abercrombie and Fitch or Mike Jeffries. BBC investigation also uncovered details of the so-called well-oiled machine organizing sex events for Mr. Jeffries, in which recruiters would find men to attend his events and receive between $500 and $1,000 from Mr. Jacobson for every referral. Mr. Jacobson described the men as the middleman or casting agent found men for the sex events. The BBC was told he forwarded photos of them to Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Smith. Most of the men allege Mr. Jacobson propositioned or sexually auditioned them by requesting or offering to perform oral sex before being introduced to Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Smith. So a lot of these are reminiscent to other cases we've seen of sex trafficking, which is why the allegations are as severe as they are. Now, let's talk a little bit about some more of the allegations. A personal groomer was hired to intimately shave body hair from some of the men attending events, and experience some described as dehumanizing. All the men said they were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. They said they had little time to read it and were not allowed to keep copies, but understood they would be sued if they spoke out. A small group of Mr. Jeffries' personal staff who wore A&F uniforms supervised the men even during the sex acts and handed them money. It is alleged Mr. Jeffries funded the entire operation, including the money for referral fees, while Mr. Smith organized the cash payments. And then finally, A&F, which has said it considers Mr. Jeffries its modern day founder, told the BBC it was appalled and disgusted by his alleged behavior. It said new leadership has transformed the company into the values-driven organization we are today, and it has zero tolerance for abuse, harassment, or discrimination of any kind. I also just want to add that one of the allegations by one of the victims was that he attended one of these parties and believes himself to have been drugged, and then he believes he was raped, although he has no memory of it. He woke up with indications that he was raped and then found out years later that he was HIV positive, something he believes he contracted while at one of these parties. And these are really serious allegations, Senator, and also because it's coming from the BBC, and in in the UK they have very strict defamation laws. So this is a years-long investigation. They have to be very thorough. They have to cross-check every single source 10 times over to ensure that they're not going to be subject to liability. And I'm glad to see that the company is now disavowing this man who they've celebrated for so long, which has probably been so painful for these victims, but there needs to be charges brought. There needs to be justice.
Yeah, definitely. And thank God for the investigation, because but for the investigation revealing these facts, he would still be getting away with this, and he has destroyed the lives of those young people. This is predatory, in nature. It's pervasive in that type of industry, unfortunately, maybe not to that total degree. But Rayyvana, we know that there are lots of stories out there, people either going into modeling or going into acting, or the music industry, unfortunately, who are being propositioned and told you got to do X to get Y. It is an absolute shame that this happened, but again, so glad the investigation is going on, or that the investigate will continue, but that this story has been put out there. And hopefully justice is served, court, all of that, and justice is served. But it is quite disturbing, to say the least.
Absolutely disturbing. Hopefully this man was allowed to reach age 79, no repercussions for this behavior. Right. So it's far too late, but it's not too late for these victims to feel some justice. So we'll keep everybody updated on that story.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.